At 2:20 local time, while flying over the Mediterranean Sea, a sudden fire broke out in the cockpit of the plane. The fire alarm blared loudly, and the crew rushed to put out the flames. Thick black smoke filled the air and began to spread into the cabin, making the passengers panic and fear for their lives. The autopilot system failed, and the plane shook violently, tilting 90 degrees to the left. A moment later, it spun 360 degrees to the right and then crashed straight into the cold Mediterranean Sea. The black box and cockpit voice recorder were found deep underwater, uncovering a disturbing secret. What was happening in that cockpit? Was this a planned attack with terrorist motives? Stay tuned to find out more in this video. Flight MS-804 carried 66 passengers and crew members, including seasoned pilots like Captain Mohammed Shoker and First Officer Mohammed Asim. The flight was expected to be uneventful, with the aircraft cruising at a stable altitude of 37,000 feet. However, beneath the surface, a ticking time bomb was waiting to ignite. The plane had recently undergone maintenance, including the replacement of the co-pilot's oxygen mask, a seemingly minor detail that would later prove to be a critical factor in the disaster. The stage was set for a catastrophe, but no one on board could have foreseen the deadly chain of events that was about to unfold. The crew, confident in their skills and the aircraft's capabilities, had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. But hidden within the mechanical systems of the plane, a series of small but significant errors were aligning to create a scenario that would soon spiral out of control. As the plane climbed higher into the night sky, the passengers settled into their seats, unaware that their lives were hanging by a thread. This flight, which should have been just another routine journey, was about to become a devastating chapter in aviation history. The decisions made in those critical moments would have far-reaching consequences, turning an ordinary flight into a catastrophic event that would be remembered for years to come. The passengers and crew had no idea that their fates were being sealed by a series of seemingly minor oversights that would culminate in a tragedy beyond comprehension. Nothing beats the kick of a strong coffee before a flight, Captain Mohammed Shoker exclaimed, savoring the hot, aromatic brew. His eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a man who knew his craft well. The pre-flight checks are all done and everything's in order. Ready to get this bird in the air? Absolutely, Captain. First Officer Mohammed Asim replied with enthusiasm. He quickly grabbed the flight documents and, almost as an afterthought, shoved 3 bottles of hairspray he'd picked up for a friend into a crinkled paper bag. With a shared look of determination, the 2 pilots strode towards the aircraft, the hum of anticipation buzzing between them. It was just after 11 p.m. when they boarded the A320, and the plane's engines roared to life, filling the air with a deep, rumbling power that hinted at the journey ahead. ATC, this is MS-804. We're locked and loaded, ready for takeoff on runway 27, Captain Shoker announced with an air of command as he gripped the controls. MS-804, you're clear for takeoff on runway 27. Winds 270 degrees at 10 knots. Safe travels. The voice from the tower responded, sealing their fate. The plane surged forward, cutting through the night with fierce determination. The engines thundered as the aircraft lifted off, breaking free from the Earth's grasp and soaring into the starlit sky. By 11:10 p.m., the A320 was climbing effortlessly to 10,000 feet. Captain Shoker's voice was calm as he communicated with air traffic control, though his mind was sharply focused on the task at hand. MS-804 climbing to 10,000 feet, he reported. MS-804, radar contact. Proceed to climb and maintain 15,000 feet, came the routine instructions from ATC. The aircraft obeyed flawlessly, gliding upward into the vast expanse of the night sky. By 11:30 p.m., it had reached its cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, where the journey seemed to smooth out into a rhythm of gentle stability. The passengers were lulled into sleep, unaware of the brewing storm that fate had in store. As the clock ticked past 2 a.m. on May 19, 2016, the cabin was bathed in the soft glow of night lights, and a deep silence had settled over the passengers. But in the cockpit, a different scene was playing out. The 2 pilots, seasoned and confident, chatted easily, their words masking the creeping fatigue that was beginning to set in. Damn, it's getting late, Captain Shoker muttered, his eyelids drooping slightly. This coffee's not doing the trick. I need to wake up or I'm gonna nod off. I'm stepping out for a smoke. All right, Captain, I've got the controls. First Officer Asim responded, his tone steady, but a hint of weariness creeping in. Unbeknownst to them, this seemingly harmless decision was the first step toward catastrophe. Incredibly, EgyptAir still allowed smoking on board at the time, a policy that would soon play a role in their undoing. Minutes after the captain left the cockpit, the control computer blared a smoke warning from the restroom. Asim barely glanced at it, his mind at ease knowing where the captain was. He dismissed the alert without a second thought, not realizing the chain reaction he had just set in motion. But the itch for a cigarette was now gnawing at Asim as well. With a quick glance around, he pulled out a cigarette, lit it, and inhaled deeply, feeling the familiar rush of nicotine. As the smoke curled lazily into the air, he placed the half-smoked cigarette on the edge of the control panel. He had earlier placed the crumpled paper bag with his belongings, including those hairspray bottles, right next to the vents that cooled the aircraft's vital systems. In that moment, a ticking time bomb was set. The cockpit, once a place of calm and control, was about to become the epicenter of a deadly disaster. The computer screamed another smoke warning, this time from the cockpit. Asim, his judgment clouded by fatigue, ignored it, assuming it was just another false alarm. When Captain Shoker returned, the two resumed their conversation, their words carefree, completely oblivious to the deadly inferno that was about to ignite just inches away. The small decisions they made would soon lead to a chain reaction that no one could stop. The innocent act of lighting a cigarette was about to ignite a firestorm, one that would not only consume the aircraft, but also send shockwaves through the entire aviation industry. The first warning signs were about to appear, but by the time they did, it would already be too late to prevent the catastrophe. The clock was ticking, and the fate of flight MS-804 was hanging in the balance. As the fire raged unchecked in the cockpit, it became clear that a combination of system failures and inherent design flaws in the Airbus A320 played a significant role in the unfolding tragedy. One of the most critical failures was the malfunction of the autopilot system, which disengaged as the fire in the cockpit spread. The A320's autopilot is designed to handle various flight conditions autonomously, but when the system suddenly went offline, the pilots were forced to take manual control under extremely challenging circumstances. The fire, which had already compromised visibility and air quality in the cockpit, made it nearly impossible for the crew to regain stable control of the aircraft. This highlighted a significant vulnerability in the design of the aircraft: the lack of redundancy in manual controls when automated systems failed during emergencies. Furthermore, the design and maintenance of the cockpit's oxygen supply system came under intense scrutiny. The emergency oxygen system, which was supposed to provide breathable air to the crew in case of smoke or depressurization, may have inadvertently exacerbated the fire. Investigators found that the oxygen masks, particularly the co-pilots, had been set to an emergency mode that increased oxygen flow, potentially feeding the flames in the confined space of the cockpit. This flaw, coupled with the fact that the system was not designed to withstand intense heat and fire, pointed to a need for a comprehensive review of safety standards related to emergency oxygen systems in commercial aircraft. The implications of these findings suggest that the very systems designed to protect the crew in an emergency could, under certain conditions, contribute to a disaster. The fire's spread was further accelerated by the flammable materials in the cockpit, particularly the paper bag containing hairspray bottles, which acted as additional fuel for the flames. This revealed another critical oversight: the potential hazards posed by personal items carried by crew members that could exacerbate a fire in the confined space of a cockpit. The cascading failures of the aircraft's systems, combined with these design flaws and overlooked hazards, created a situation that was nearly impossible to recover from once it began. The disaster was not merely a result of one failure, but a perfect storm of vulnerabilities that converged to create a catastrophic outcome. At 2:23 a.m., the unthinkable happened. A fire broke out in the cockpit, likely ignited by the cigarette near the paper bag. The flames quickly spread, fueled by the flammable contents, and began to consume the control panel with terrifying speed. Despite multiple smoke warnings from the aircraft's sophisticated computer systems, the crew dismissed them, believing they were triggered by the captain's cigarette. But the fire was relentless, spreading rapidly and causing a series of critical system failures. As the cockpit filled with thick smoke, the crew's efforts to extinguish the flames proved futile. The situation spiraled out of control, leaving the pilots struggling to maintain control of the aircraft as it descended into chaos. The intensity of the fire was beyond anything the crew had ever encountered. The sophisticated systems that were supposed to protect them were now failing one by one, overwhelmed by the relentless flames. Panic set in as the fire began to consume not just the cockpit, but the entire aircraft, sending thick, suffocating smoke throughout the cabin. Passengers and crew alike were plunged into a nightmare, their lives hanging in the balance as the plane hurtled towards disaster. The fight to save the aircraft was quickly becoming a fight for survival, but the odds were stacked against them. By 2:27 a.m., the fire had compromised the plane's critical systems, leading to the disengagement of the autopilot and an uncontrolled descent. The A320, once a symbol of modern aviation, was now a death trap, hurtling towards the sea at terrifying speed. The pilots, disoriented and gasping for air, fought to regain control, but the fire had already done irreversible damage. The aircraft tilted violently, spun 360 degrees, and finally plummeted into the Mediterranean Sea, taking all 66 lives with it. In the blink of an eye, what began as a routine flight ended in unimaginable tragedy, leaving the world to wonder how such a disaster could happen. The final moments of Flight MS-804 were a chaotic blur of fear and desperation. The once orderly cabin was now a scene of panic, with passengers and crew alike struggling to comprehend what was happening. The plane's descent was unstoppable, a deadly spiral that no amount of skill or experience could reverse. As the aircraft hit the water, the impact sealed the fate of everyone on board, leaving behind only questions and a trail of debris scattered across the Mediterranean. The tragedy was complete, but the mystery was just beginning as investigators raced to uncover the truth behind the disaster. The recovery of the black box and cockpit voice recorder from the depths of the Mediterranean revealed the full extent of the disaster. The fire, ignited by the co-pilot's cigarette, was fueled by a perfect storm of factors, including the flammable contents of the paper bag and a critical error in the maintenance of the co-pilot's oxygen mask. The mask had been set to emergency mode, leaking oxygen into the cockpit and turning it into a tinderbox. This combination of human error and mechanical failure created a disaster that was almost impossible to prevent once it began. As investigators meticulously pieced together the events leading to the crash, they uncovered a chilling sequence of oversights that, if addressed earlier, could have saved lives. The investigation uncovered a series of alarming oversights that painted a picture of systemic failure. The oxygen leak, a seemingly small error during maintenance, had created the perfect conditions for a fire to ignite and spread uncontrollably. The flammable materials in the paper bag only added fuel to the fire, transforming a small flame into an inferno that no one could stop. The findings were shocking, a stark reminder of how even the smallest mistakes can lead to catastrophic consequences when flying at 37,000 feet. The truth was finally out, but it was too late for the 66 souls who lost their lives in the disaster. The crash of Flight MS-804 was more than just an isolated incident. It was a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that exist within the aviation industry. EgyptAir's history of safety issues, coupled with the Egyptian government's reluctance to release investigation data, only fueled speculation and doubt about the true cause of the disaster. This tragedy highlighted the need for stricter maintenance protocols and greater transparency in the aftermath of such incidents. As the aviation industry grapples with the lessons from this disaster, one thing is clear: the cost of complacency is far too high. Could this be the wake-up call that forces the industry to re-evaluate its practices, or will the lessons of Flight MS-804 be forgotten as just another chapter in aviation history? The broader implications of this disaster cannot be ignored. The failures that led to the crash of Flight MS-804 are a wake-up call to the entire aviation industry, a reminder that safety can never be taken for granted. The systemic issues uncovered during the investigation highlight the need for rigorous oversight, better training, and a commitment to transparency that ensures the safety of every flight. The world watched in horror as the details of the disaster emerged, and now it's up to the industry to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. The future of air travel depends on learning from the past, and the lessons of Flight MS-804 must be heeded if we are to keep the skies safe. The tragedy of EgyptAir Flight 804 serves as a harrowing reminder of the catastrophic consequences that can arise from a combination of human error, mechanical failure, and neglected safety protocols. The loss of 66 lives could have been prevented if the signs had been recognized and addressed sooner. This disaster underscores the critical importance of rigorous maintenance, adherence to safety standards, and the need for constant vigilance in an industry where the margin for error is razor thin. As we reflect on the lessons from this heartbreaking event, it is imperative that the aviation industry takes decisive action to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. The future of air travel depends on learning from the past and ensuring that the skies remain safe for everyone. As we reflect on the lessons from this heartbreaking event, it is imperative that the aviation industry takes decisive action to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. The future of air travel depends on learning from the past and ensuring that the skies remain safe for everyone. The legacy of Flight MS-804 should not be one of tragedy, but of transformation. The lessons learned from this disaster must lead to real change. Change that will save lives and prevent future tragedies from unfolding in our skies. The aviation industry owes it to the victims of Flight MS-804 and to every passenger who steps on board an aircraft to make sure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated. Let this be a turning point where complacency is replaced with a renewed commitment to safety and where every flight is a safe flight. The skies may be vast, but they must also be safe. And it is our responsibility to ensure that they are.